In September 1939, Europe erupted in the roar of engines and the blaze of gunfire. In the West, Nazi Germany embodied a philosophy of warfare unlike any before it, the worship of the individual genius, viewing each ace pilot as a living weapon, a single person capable of altering the course of the battlefield. The Luftwaffe trained them as artists of killing, decision-makers of the instant, relying on instinct and flawless judgment. Adolf Galland, one of its first commanders, once said, "We do not need systems, we need instinct." That sentence encapsulated the entire soul of the Luftwaffe, the arrogance of individuality, and the belief that man could transcend the limits of technology. Across the Atlantic, America was building an opposite doctrine. The United States Army did not seek geniuses but uniformity, a human production line with the precision of machinery. The Army Air Corps believed in the principle that standardization saves lives. Every operation, from takeoff procedures to radio communication, was codified into regulations. According to the War Department report of 1938, technical consistency is the backbone of strategic superiority. That was how America would win through engineering and organization. In that model, there was no room for exceptions, and thus Black Americans, regardless of ability, were excluded from the system for one reason alone. They were deemed incapable of operating a complex machine. At that time, the idea of a black pilot was to many Americans more distant than the notion of reaching the moon. The racial segregation system in the military was legitimized by pseudo-scientific reports. Negro troops possess emotional instability, unsuited for technical roles, wrote a report from the Army War College in 1925. Every line of that report was a blade severing the hopes of a young generation of Black Americans. Yet the irony was that the very era of industrialization, the very faith in systems, opened a narrow gap for change. In Alabama, amid the blinding white cotton fields, an educational institution named the Tuskegee Institute existed like an oasis of knowledge, founded by Booker T. Washington in the late 19th century, Tuskegee initially trained agricultural engineers, mechanics, and teachers. But by the late 1932, as America entered the fever of defense industrialization, the school became the foundation of a Black community eager to prove its competence. They believed that if they could master machines, they could master the future. In April 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Public Law 18, a small statute attached to the defense budget. In its annotations was a clause few noticed: to permit the training of Negro pilots within the civilian pilot training program. To most legislators, it was merely a political concession, a gesture to secure the votes of Northern Black citizens. But to the African American community, it was a revolutionary signal. It allowed them entry into the highest realm of technology aviation, the symbol of a new age. In 1940, the Civil Aeronautics Authority selected Tuskegee as one of the training sites for the program. No one on the committee then believed it would be a serious endeavor. The mission of Tuskegee, according to records preserved in the National Archives, was to determine the technical adaptability limits of Negro personnel. It was not an invitation, but an experiment, a human resources test, disguised as equality. When Civil Aeronautics Administration inspectors arrived in Alabama, they brought charts, statistical tables, and skepticism. Everything at Tuskegee was measured from neural reflexes to map-reading ability under dim light. As former engineer Raymond Jarvis recalled, "We were not being trained to fly. We were being trained to see if we were intelligent enough to fly." Trainees had to complete 300 hours of practical training, 50% more than the standard required of white pilots. Behind the veneer of equality, the project's true purpose was cold and precise, to prove that an entire group of people could not be integrated into modern technological systems. According to an internal War Department memorandum from June 1940, if the Tuskegee program fails, it will reinforce the scientific basis for current segregation policy. But machines do not know color, and humans, when placed before machines, either learn to move in harmony with them or are left behind. On January 16, 1941, the War Department officially established the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first all-black flying unit in United States history. Under the command of Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a man who had endured 4 years of silence at West Point because no one dared to speak to him, the unit was designed as an experimental model. "We were not given an opportunity. We were given a test," Davis wrote in his post-war memoir. The purpose of the program was not to defeat the enemy, but to collect data. Every flight hour, every takeoff was recorded in charts. Error rates, radio responses, and flight path deviations all were entered into spreadsheets to evaluate racial competence. According to the 1941 report by the Civil Aeronautics Authority, Tuskegee had a training completion rate of 41%, lower than that of white centers. But that number was misunderstood. At Tuskegee, exclusion standards were 1.5 times higher, meaning only the most exceptional were retained. They were creating not merely pilots, but men capable of becoming the most precise components of a vast machine. A white supervising officer, after witnessing the group's first test flight, wrote in his diary, "They obey orders as if each man were a bolt, and perhaps that is what frightens me." The sentence inadvertently touched the essence of the experiment. America was creating a force it did not yet realize would change history. 1941 ended under Europe's smoke-filled skies, and in Alabama, the PT-17 training planes still took off in steady rhythm. Over the red, arid soil, the hum of engines mingled with the whistle of wind across metal wings. None of them knew that only 2 years later, they would soar over the Mediterranean, face the Luftwaffe, and prove that discipline, not genius, was the ultimate technology of war. Later, at a veterans gathering in Washington, a witness recalled, "They once said black men could not learn aeronautical engineering, but the moment I saw them take off, I understood the system had created exactly what it sought to deny." And in the distance, amid the roar of Pratt and Whitney engines, the concept of man and machine began to merge into one. At Tuskegee, everything began as an experiment. But over time, it evolved into a machine so precise that even Washington was astonished. The trainees were not seen as individuals, but as components in a production line of combat pilots. From the moment they set foot on the base, every action, reflex, and habit was measured, recorded, and analyzed. "They made us numbers," maintenance engineer George Watson recalled during a seminar in 1975, "but we decided to make those numbers perfect." And within that steel framework of discipline, a new philosophy of warfare was forged. The training program at Tuskegee was designed with a rigor that bordered on absurdity. Each trainee had to accumulate at least 300 flight hours, more than any other program in the United States Army Air Forces at the time. For comparison, according to the Army Air Forces Training Command Report of 1942, the average white pilot logged about 200 hours before deployment. Those at Tuskegee had to study more, work more, and make fewer mistakes. Every exercise was technical in nature, handling radio communications under signal interference, adjusting engine revolutions at high temperatures, and practicing night gunnery with reflective sights. They were required to achieve precision approaching that of test pilots. A deviation of even a few seconds could mean elimination. A trainee named Eugene Robinson wrote in his memoir, "We didn't just learn to fly, we learned to talk to machines." Every morning, the synchronized roar of dozens of PT-17 engines echoed like the heartbeat of a factory. While the pilots trained in the air, the mechanics monitored every parameter, recording temperature, speed, and oil pressure. Those logbooks piled high in the operations room evidence of a training process that was more scientific than military. Inside the barbed wire fences, 16,000 people worked toward a common goal. Only about 1,000 were pilots. The rest were engineers, mechanics, electricians, aerodynamic inspectors, and logisticians. They were not merely support staff, but an essential part of a living aircraft production line. According to a 1943 report from the War Department Technical Division, the organizational structure at Tuskegee was modeled after an industrial plant, divided into inspection, repair, communications, and supply departments. They built a self-contained model of production, training, and maintenance, where each person was a cog in a system that was never allowed to stop. Supervising Officer John Deering, who had once opposed the program, wrote in his October 19, 40T report, "This base operates with mechanical discipline unseen elsewhere." Every engine and every propeller was numbered and maintained according to a fixed schedule. Any malfunction in any component was immediately traced back through the inspection chain to identify responsibility. That organizational method made Tuskegee function like an industrial assembly line in the Alabama desert. There was no improvisation, no heroism, only the system. The base was perpetually short of supplies. By 1942, only 40% of the equipment had been delivered on time. Many parts had to be recycled from scrap metal or assembled manually. According to Engineering Log Number 77, stored at the National Archives, the mechanics once melted soldering silver from old electrical wires to weld the exhaust pipes of Allison engines. Yet under such conditions, the base achieved a 100% operational rate equal to or exceeding many white bases. Not a single mission was cancelled due to technical failure during the final quarter of 1942. Scarcity itself bred innovation. They taught themselves to reinforce wings with fabric, improve air filters to resist sand, and redesign cockpits for the southern climate. Every small invention was documented in technical reports and sent to the War Department. Many improvements were later adopted throughout the entire Air Force. According to the Army Air Force's Material Command, Tuskegee was the base with the lowest average repair time in the entire system. Each of those dry numbers testified to how discipline had become technology. The atmosphere on the base had its own rhythm. By day, the deep rumble of engines repeated endlessly. By night, the pounding of hammers and the clash of metal filled the workshops. Engineers worked until dawn, sweat mixing with oil and dust. Davis Jr. inspected every area without prior notice. He spoke little, his gaze cold and sharp, but everyone understood that his silence carried more weight than orders. He believed that order itself could be a weapon, one trainee recalled. In his world, the system was stronger than the individual, and discipline was the only force capable of resisting chaos. Davis's presence was like a measure of precision. He required every pilot to keep a logbook after each flight, recording the engine's sound, vibrations, and control feel in detail. Those logs later became the foundation of the U.S. Air Force's training manuals. According to USAAF Training Memo 4-43, data collected from Tuskegee was used to refine pre-flight inspection procedures across the entire force. A program once dismissed as an experiment had now generated the official standards of operation. To many high-ranking officers, Tuskegee was no longer an exception. It was proof that scientific methods could transform a marginalized group into a model unit. And in every hand gripping the control stick, in every gaze through the cockpit glass, something had changed. They no longer fought to be recognized, but to prove the correctness of the system they believed in. By the end of 1943, while Europe still burned in war, in Alabama, the Tuskegee pilots graduated from their final training course. Beneath the blazing sky, they stood in long lines on the runway. Davis Jr. stood still, his hand resting on his flight cap, eyes fixed on the horizon. The engines roared steady, sharp, perfect. He nodded slightly. An assembly line had just been completed, not of steel, but of human will. And in the red dust winds of Alabama, a new doctrine of warfare was taking shape. When humans learn to operate like machines, they become more precise than any machine could ever be. In early 1943, the air war over North Africa became an open laboratory for the great powers. After months of harsh training, the Tuskegee assembly line was put to the test in the skies above Tunisia, where desert and gun smoke blended. The deployment order was signed on April 19th. The 99th Pursuit Squadron was attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Momia, a famously conservative officer. They were issued P-40 Warhawk aircraft, a model already outdated compared to its German rivals. The Allison V1710 engine was nearly 400 horsepower weaker than the Merlin, with a top speed 60 miles per hour slower than the Fu 190. According to statistics from the Air Technical Service Command in 1943, the P-40 reached an average speed of 362 miles per hour, while the FW 190 could exceed 420. From the very beginning, the experiment was distorted. The 99th was not provided with radar warning systems, had no reconnaissance escort units, and was assigned only low-altitude patrol missions. All data they collected was sent back to Washington, not as combat results but as a measure of competence. Several pilots later recalled that they were fully aware of it. "They sent us to fail," wrote Lieutenant Charles Dryden in his memoir. But within those preordained limits, they found something more important than opportunity. They found a reason to prove that their system was stronger than prejudice. On July 2, 1943, the sky over Sicily turned pale blue after a rainstorm. The unit led by 22-year-old Charles B. Hall took off from Castelvetrano base to escort B-25 Mitchell bombers. After the formation left the area, two FW-190s appeared from the west, slicing through the formation. Hall accelerated, pulled his P-40 upward, then dropped his angle suddenly. According to mission report number 33, he hit his target at a range of 300 yards, his bullets piercing the enemy fuselage before it caught fire and crashed into a field to the south. The 9th Air Force technical note described, "Excellent target approach control, accurate fire within a speed disadvantage of 60 miles per hour. It was the first kill by a black pilot in the history of the United States Army Air Forces, and a shot that startled the Luftwaffe. News of the victory spread through the base faster than the radio signal. Mechanics dropped their wrenches and stood still along the runway. Hall stepped out of the plane, sweat and dust mixed on his face. A comrade handed him a cold drink, but Hall said nothing. Later he simply recalled, "The system worked." An ordinary sentence, but for Tuskegee it was a declaration. They had used the very procedures and discipline that had been mocked to defeat German technology, yet skepticism at the command level remained unchanged. Late in 1943, Colonel Mumya submitted a report of more than 20 pages to the War Department, concluding that 99th Fighter Squadron lacks aggressiveness and initiative. He accused them of avoiding combat, failing to exploit technical opportunities, and recommended their withdrawal from the front. According to records preserved in War Department Operations File 2249, Mumya even proposed replacing all leadership with white officers. When the report reached General Henry Hap Arnold, many officers agreed. A program once called an experiment was about to end under the very prejudice that had created it. In that context, Davis Jr. was summoned to Washington to testify. He brought with him all mission logs and training data. "We don't guess, we record," he said before the Air Force Evaluation Committee. But words were not enough. They needed battlefield proof. The chance came in early 1944, when the Allies launched the Anzio campaign in central Italy. The 99th was assigned to provide air support, still flying their aging P-40s. "If we fail here, Tuskegee ends," Davis told his pilots before takeoff. On January 27, 1944, the sky over Anzio was thick with smoke and anti-aircraft fire. 15 P-42s of the 99th engaged more than 20 FW-190s attacking Allied transport ships. According to the operational report of the 12th Air Force, within 2 days, the Tuskegee unit shot down between 8 and 13 enemy aircraft, depending on the source. On average, their effectiveness reached 0.6 kills per aircraft sortie, the highest of that week. Pilots Charles Hall and Leonard Jackson each scored an additional victory. The result report was sent directly to Washington, accompanied by a note from the division commander, "Performance comparable to any P-40 unit under similar conditions." Those dry statistics saved the entire program. On February 4, General Arnold ordered the suspension of all disbandment proposals. He directed the establishment of an independent technical committee to evaluate the 99th's data. The findings released in March 1944 concluded, "No statistical difference in performance between Tuskegee pilots and white squadrons." A short sentence, yet it shattered a prejudice that had persisted in the U.S. military for 2 decades. In the field, the 99th pilots did not know they had just saved a generation. They saw only the muddy runways, bullet-riddled aircraft, and comrades who never returned. In a small tent at Anzio, Davis Jr. sat before a map, looking at the list of pilots. He knew those numbers 8, 10, or 13 mattered less than what they proved. "They put us in a laboratory," he told a war correspondent. But the experiment's result was, discipline defeats instinct. That night, wind swept through rows of wooden stakes, carrying the scent of gasoline and gunpowder. An engineer wrote in his diary, "The P-40's wings shake like an old man's lungs, but it still flies because someone believes in it." To the west, the red lights of a German base flickered, then went dark. In that darkness, silence blanketed the Mediterranean sky. And in that silence, the Luftwaffe began to lose its certainty. Integration marked the transition from scattered experimentation to a deliberate combat apparatus. In 1944, the 99th, 100th, 301st and 302nd Fighter Squadrons were consolidated into the 332nd Fighter Group, a complete administrative and tactical structure. This decision was not merely a change of designation, it was a transformation in mindset from an experimental group to a production unit, where every pilot was a link in a chain of precise reactions. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. stood at the center of this transformation. He did not seek individual heroes, he established procedures, turning discipline into an instrument of victory. The reality of 1944 was a technological race, but decisive victory did not depend solely on engines or speed. When the P-51 Mustang entered service, a new technological framework enabled Tuskegee to elevate its mission. The P-51, powered by the Packard Merlin engine, according to technical documentation, reached a maximum speed of approximately 437 miles per hour, with a range exceeding 1,600 miles when equipped with auxiliary tanks. This capability allowed deep penetration escort missions into enemy territory. According to air technical reports, the Packard Merlin transformed escort capability, one summary concluded, with the P-51, maintaining formation and accompanying bomber groups became feasible at ranges previously unattainable. Davis did not stop at technological adoption, he standardized tactics. His famous principle, "stay with the bombers," was materialized into a three-layer model: low escort, middle escort, and high escort. The low layer stayed close to the bomber's fuselage, protecting against attacks from below. The middle layer maintained a defensive perimeter, intercepting lateral assaults. The high layer monitored from above, preventing confusion or surprise attacks from higher altitude. Structurally, this model resembled a multi-tiered production line. Each layer had a defined purpose, each element operated within a precise range, and every movement interlocked to achieve a shared objective. The ultimate goal was to maximize bomber survival probability, not to maximize kill counts. It was the conversion of combat thinking into technical doctrine. Implementation of the process did not occur overnight. It emerged from accumulated data, mission logs, and deadly errors. Every flight, every engine variable, every pilot's flight hour was recorded, analyzed, and refined. According to training records, formation recovery drills, attack angle adjustments, and radio operations were continuously simulated until pilot reflexes became standardized behaviors. It was a shift from individual capability to systemic capability. When one pilot erred, the chain adjusted the system, absorbed and corrected the fault. The Red Tail's reputation developed alongside this process. Painting the P-51 tails red was not for decoration. It was a rapid identification marker in combat, allowing bomber crews to instantly recognize which unit guarded them. Bomber crews began requesting red tail escort whenever possible, knowing that formations protected by the 332nd were the most consistent, rarely abandoning bombers to chase easier targets. That reputation was not born from glory-seeking but from battlefield efficiency, from actual survival rates. The system's true test came on July 18, 1944, near Memmingen, when 66 P-51 seconds of the 332nd encountered roughly 104 190 fighters of the Luftwaffe. The results recorded 11 to 12 enemy aircraft destroyed and 3 Tuskegee pilots lost. That figure, listed in the combat report, was not merely a battle summary, it was a metric of a standardized model. The three-layer escort formation had proven effective under asymmetric conditions, when the enemy held numerical and positional advantage. One commander wrote in his post-battle report, "Their discipline kept our bombers intact when numbers were against us." That statement encapsulated the essence of victory, not an individual performance, but the efficiency of a system. Tactical analysis revealed the difference between ace thinking and system thinking. An ace could alter a moment. A system ensured repeatable, scalable outcomes. In a prolonged bombing campaign, what mattered was not one or two brilliant victories, but the average survival rate of bomber groups over hundreds of missions. The 332nd, under Davis's procedures, aimed for that figure and achieved it. According to 15th Air Force reports, bomber groups escorted by the 332nd lost 27 aircraft compared to an average of 46 for other escort formations. That number was not a declaration, it was proof. The transition from experiment to standardization also brought internal consequences. Training files began incorporating the Tuskegee experience into the general curriculum. Lessons on radio communication, formation recovery, and rapid maintenance were codified. Technical innovations derived from field experience such as wing reinforcement or air filter optimization were quickly disseminated. The data collection system from flight missions became a resource for the entire Air Force, and that data demonstrated a central thesis. Analysis, standardization, and repetition produced combat strength. Inside the operations tent, Davis often looked out toward the runway before his pilots took off. He understood that technology was a necessary condition, but process and people were the sufficient ones. A witness described the scene before a mission: sunlight glinting off flight helmets, engines humming in steady unison like a clock. Davis remained silent for a moment, then said, "Precision will outlast bravery." The brief remark was comprehensive. It became the creed of a newly born doctrine. By the end of 1944, the 332nd had proven that a unit operating by standardized procedure could achieve efficiency equal to or greater than those relying on individual prowess. They did not diminish the value of aces, they placed them within a structure where the ace's effectiveness could be amplified, controlled, and replicated. That was the greatest legacy of 1944. The technical doctrine had created a new form of combat capability, where discipline was technology, and humans were measurable, analyzable, and perfectible components. And in that order, the battlefield was remade. By early 1945, the air war in Europe had reached its technological limit. It was no longer a battle between propeller-driven planes, but between two eras, between the precision honed by human discipline and the overwhelming speed of machines. Nazi Germany unleashed its final weapon, the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, the world's first aircraft to reach a speed of 540 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles faster than the P-51 Mustang. According to the Air Technical Intelligence Command report, each Me-262 carried two Jumo 004 jet engines and could climb to 37,000 feet within minutes, making it appear to Allied pilots as a phantom beyond reach. On March 24, 1945, the 15th Air Force Headquarters issued a special order. 43 P-51 Mustangs from the 332nd Fighter Group would escort B-17 and B-24 heavy bombers in an attack on the Daimler-Benz factory in Berlin, the central production site for German tank and jet engines. The mission would cover nearly 1,600 miles round trip, lasting more than 7 hours, spanning almost the entire expanse of hostile airspace. According to Mission Report Number 67, reconnaissance units confirmed that Me-262s from Unit JG-7, Nowotny, had been deployed to defend the target. Davis understood that this was not merely another sortie, it was the final test of the doctrine he had built. Before takeoff, he issued a rare tactical order. The entire squadron would feign retreat upon spotting jets, forcing the enemy to decelerate in pursuit, then suddenly turn and attack from the blind zone behind the jet's wings, where the exhaust heat created radar interference and reduced the German pilot's visibility. As pilot Roscoe Brown recalled, "We had to think faster than the jets could fly. None of them was sure the plan would work, but they knew that if the system functioned perfectly, the outcome would depend on precision, not luck." As the bomber formation neared Berlin, ground radar detected dozens of Me-262s taking off from Rhein and Brandenburg bases. Their silver flashes cut through the clouds, streaking forward like lightning. The German jets attacked in hit-and-run patterns, firing from afar and breaking off before the P-51 seconds could react. For the first time in history, the Tuskegee pilots faced weapons moving faster than human perception could follow. According to combat chronology, 24 March 1945, 4 bombers were downed in the first 3 minutes. Davis remained calm on the radio. "Hold your pattern. Don't chase the ghosts." At that moment, an opportunity appeared. 3 Mi-262s turned slower than expected, likely overcompensating for airflow adjustment. Davis gave the order to strike back. Roscoe Brown pulled his P-51 upward, banked at a 15-degree angle, and attacked from the 8 o'clock position relative to the Mi-262. "I saw the jet streaking ahead," he later recounted. "I fired 3 long bursts from 2,000 feet and saw the canopy blow." The German pilot bailed out at 24,500 feet, the first jet kill of the day. Elsewhere, Earl Lane applied the same tactic from the opposite side. He fired from nearly 2,000 yards, using the K-14 computing gun sight, an American innovation that automatically calculated the target's future position. According to the radar tracking log, the recorded average speed at the time of kill was 420 miles per hour, meaning Lane had calculated the intercept point roughly 2 seconds in advance, something only a shooter capable of flawless data processing could achieve. No one mentioned the color of the pilot when he returned to base, only the cold figures in the report: approach angle, velocity, firing time, bullet count. The third victory came from Charles Brantley, who ambushed a Mi-262 slowing for landing. His P-51 followed the jet's exhaust trail, opened fire from 1,500 yards, and hit the engine, which exploded. 3 German jets were shot down in a single morning, more than most escort groups achieved throughout the entire campaign. According to the 9th Air Force Assessment Report, it was the only confirmed multi-jet kill by a single escort group in World War II. After leaving the combat zone, the bomber formation continued its mission. Despite losses, they succeeded. The Daimler-Benz plant was destroyed by more than 70% of its capacity, as assessed by the Allied Bombing Survey of 1945. The 332nd returned to Ramitelli in silence. No one celebrated. Davis entered the command tent and wrote a single sentence in his logbook. "System held under stress." The post-mission technical analysis revealed that the difference lay not in speed or firepower, but in mathematical reasoning and systemic discipline. Radar data recorded that the Tuskegee pilots' average time between detection and firing was 2.1 seconds, while the U.S. Air Force's overall average was 3.6 seconds. That small margin became a matter of survival. Technical specialists concluded that Tuskegee's simulation-based training regimen enabled them to predict and calculate intercept points 40% more accurately. According to the War Department Technical Review, discipline and calculated anticipation compensated for technological inferiority. The events of March 24th quickly became a topic of discussion at the War Department. A unit once dismissed as an experiment had just downed the most advanced weapon of the Third Reich. Davis was summoned to report. When a general asked for his secret, he replied simply, "We don't fight their speed, we fight their habits." That sentence was entered into the official record, and it became a doctrine of modern warfare. Victory does not come from possessing the best technology, but from understanding how technology works. The results surpassed all expectations. The 332nd Fighter Group received the Distinguished Unit Citation, and according to 15th Air Force records, their bomber loss rate was only 27 aircraft out of 179 escort missions, the lowest in the entire force. In a Luftwaffe command report from April 1945, a note read, "The red-tailed American unit maintains formation so precise that our reconnaissance cannot identify the leader." A belated acknowledgement, yet one that served as an indictment of the entire Luftwaffe system that had once worshipped individual genius. When the war ended, the remaining Mi-262s lay scattered across Berlin's runways, their jet engines lifeless under the spring Sunday. The Tuskegee pilots looked at them without a word. A young engineer stepped forward and touched the cold grey fuselage. "They built speed," he murmured, "but we built order." There, Among the charred fragments of metal, a truth emerged. Technology does not define humanity. Humanity defines technology. And in that silence, the jet age began, and the Luftwaffe died. When the guns fell silent over Europe, numbers began to speak for the men. By the end of 1945, the United States War Department launched a comprehensive inventory of aerial combat efficiency across units that had fought on the Italian-German front. The resulting report, later archived as Air Force Statistical Summary, Volume 7, completely changed how the military perceived warfare. At the bottom line of the data table, the name of the 332nd Fighter Group appeared alongside a series of figures that seemed dry at first glance, yet carried a profound lesson: 1,578 missions, more than 15,000 sorties, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed, and 27 bombers lost across 179 escort missions, compared with an average of 46 for other groups. Behind those numbers lay the formula of a scientific victory, the triumph of organization, intellect, and process. The War Department Technical Division Report, 1946, concluded that discipline and standardization increased bomber survivability by 35%. In other words, formation discipline had improved defensive efficiency by 35% compared with more flexible units. This was no longer theory but mathematical evidence. Data from the missions showed that the separation between Tuskegee's escort layers averaged 900 feet, with a deviation of no more than 5%, forming a closed defensive system that minimized enemy penetration. A system born to prove that humans could be as disciplined as machines had now officially become the model for the new strategic doctrine of the United States Air Force. According to Air Evaluation Report number 122, the analysis of Tuskegee's performance submitted to the War Department in early 1946 initiated an essential transformation: the conversion of data into doctrine. In documents archived at Maxwell Air Force Base, General Lawrence Cuter wrote, "Their discipline produced predictable success. That predictability is the essence of doctrine." That statement introduced Air Power Tactical Report number 14, a 248-page report compiled by the Army Air Forces in 1947, in which the Tuskegee model was cited as the standard example for escort tactics and formation operations. The report detailed the three-layer procedure devised by Davis Jr., specifying the role of each tier. Low cover maintains immediate protection, mid-cover intercepts, high cover oversees and adjusts. This was the first time a tactical principle had been abstracted into a formal training model. The same document officially defined the term unit over individual, which became a foundational concept of the United States Air Force, USAF, after its separation from the Army. The Tuskegee Doctrine, born within a program once dismissed as an experiment, had now become the blueprint for modern air power. This transformation did not unfold quietly. On September 15, 1947, when the USAF Air University was established in Montgomery, Alabama, the organizational model of the 332nd was incorporated into the Tactical Air Group curriculum. Lectures on formation tactics used the Memmingen mission, July 18, 1944, as a case study in three-dimensional spatial control during combat. The teaching manual Formation Dynamics in Escort Missions described the "stay with the bombers" rule as a standard of discipline and coordination. The term red tail formation appeared in internal reports to refer to a standardized, high-stability escort formation, soon becoming common vocabulary among training pilots. According to Air Staff Memorandum 348, Tuskegee's experience was also applied to post-war strategic planning. The tiered model was adopted for early Cold War air group tactics, particularly in training programs for B-29 and later B-47 pilots. Repetition, measurement, and predictability. The principles born in Alabama were translated into the operating logic of America's nuclear strategy. A Rand Corporation analyst wrote in 1948, "The red tail doctrine demonstrated that efficiency is a function of organization, not origin." But Tuskegee's influence extended beyond military strategy. In the meeting rooms of the Pentagon, the figures from the technical reports became arguments for a broader reform, social reform within the armed forces themselves. When Harry S. Truman assumed the presidency, debates over racial equality in the military intensified. An internal War Department report from February 1948 stated verbatim, "Segregation contradicts operational efficiency." That line, attached to the 332nd data, provided the scientific foundation for Executive Order 9981, signed on July 26, 1948, which officially integrated the United States Armed Forces. During a press conference in Washington, when a journalist asked why the decision had come at that particular moment, Truman replied, "We learned from the skies." It was not a rhetorical flourish. Documents from the Department of Defense confirm that the Tuskegee record was the only example cited in the Integration Recommendation Report. According to the National Defense Archives, the 332nd was described as an experimental system that proved racial integration enhances technical reliability. After the war, Davis Jr. was promoted to colonel and assigned to reorganize the Air Force pilot training program. In a speech at Maxwell in 1947, he said, "When we stopped measuring color and started measuring precision, we won twice." His words referred not only to victory over Europe's skies, but to the triumph of science over prejudice. At Tuskegee, the old hangars were converted into a center for civil aviation research. Engineers who had served in the military program joined the university faculty, continuing to use wartime flight data to train a new generation. A Civil Aeronautics Administration report in 1948 noted, "The Tuskegee methodology remains the most efficient pilot training framework recorded during wartime." The school, once dismissed as a proving ground for failure, had become an incubator of modern aeronautical thought. By late 1948, during a commemoration ceremony in Montgomery, Davis Jr. was invited to speak before hundreds of veterans. Light reflected off a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "Precision over prejudice." He paused for a few seconds and said, "Science has no color." In the audience, many nodded silently. Outside the hall, a few old training planes circled through the sunset sky, leaving faint trails of smoke memories of an era now closed. The war had ended, but from its ashes, a formula was born, a formula describing the relationship between technology and justice. 1,578 missions, 15,000 sorties, 112 aerial victories, 27 bombers lost versus 46 on average, 35% increase in efficiency. Those numbers did not merely record military achievement. They stood as evidence of reason's power in a world once divided by prejudice. When science and morality converged, history changed its flight path, and in that new trajectory, precision became the language of equality. History did not end on the day the peace treaty was signed. For Tuskegee, the war was only the first stage of a revolution in thought, where technology became a means to prove human dignity. When the United States Air Force officially separated from the Army in 1947, its training manuals were reviewed, and in the section titled Escort Doctrine, the name of the 332nd Fighter Group appeared as a prime example. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Escort Principle, Stay with the Bombers, was preserved word for word in the French and German translations when NATO was formed in 1949. It was the first time that a tactical doctrine born from a once discriminated unit became an international standard. In the archives of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, the Tuskegee Principle was cited as a model for disciplined escort integration, meaning a unified and highly organized escort model. By the 1960s, that doctrine was directly applied to B-52 bombing operations in Vietnam. According to the 1972 USAF Strategic Studies Report, B-52 formations adopted a similar three-tier structure: low, middle, and high escort fighters, ensuring no blind spots were left unguarded. More than 2 decades later, during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, the same mindset was modernized through radar and computer technology, but its essence remained unchanged. Formation discipline was the decisive factor. NATO officers called it the Tuskegee template, an unofficial term, yet one widely shared in combat pilot training courses. Their legacy was not confined to the skies. it also shaped the foundation of America's scientific and industrial world. After the military's integration in 1948, many former Tuskegee pilots transitioned into the aerospace sector. According to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, more than 30 engineers and technical specialists from Tuskegee took part in the Mercury and Apollo programs during the 1960s. They carried with them the mindset of zero tolerance for error, the same principle that had saved bomber formations over Europe. One engineer, a former escort pilot, when asked about his past, replied simply, "We were trained to measure everything, even hope." That sentence now hangs in the Langley Laboratory as a reminder that every technological achievement begins with human discipline. The transformation could also be seen in language itself. The phrase, once used to demean "they are incapable of operating high technology," gradually became a counterproof. Those once excluded from the system became the ones who perfected it. The fusion of technology and dignity caused old prejudices to dissolve by their own logic. On the other side of the former front, post-war Germany also looked back. In a 1953 Luftwaffe document appeared the line, "Schwarzer-Vogel mentioned the most disciplined Americans we ever faced." The report described the astonishment of German pilots who realized that their black adversaries never broke formation, even when outnumbered. A pilot who had fought in Italy wrote in his memoir, "They flew like a machine, but it was a machine with a soul." The phrase "humane machine" appeared for the first time in that report and was later quoted by numerous aviation historians. It contained the greatest paradox of the century. Those once deemed racially inferior proved the superiority of humanity through technology. Davis Jr. was later promoted to general in 1954, becoming the first black general in the history of the United States Air Force. He often avoided discussing race in interviews, but in a speech at West Point he said, "The system was never perfect, but we learned to make ourselves fit it, until the system had to change." When he passed away in 2002, his flag-draped coffin was laid beside those of other Tuskegee pilots at Arlington, the men who had transformed the world's doctrine of aerial warfare. Roscoe Brown, who had shot down a Me-262 over Berlin, became a university professor in New York. During a symposium in 1987, he spoke slowly before hundreds of students. "We didn't win by emotion. We won by understanding the system and trusting each other." The line was later quoted in numerous leadership training documents of the USAF and NATO as a concise definition of organizational value. Looking back more than half a century later, the Tuskegee legacy extends far beyond the limits of war. They proved that discipline does not make people mechanical, it makes machines humane. They showed the world that when industrial logic meets human dignity, technology becomes the common language of progress. From Alabama in 1941 to the skies over Berlin in 1945, from the deserts of the Middle East to outer space, every achievement bears the imprint of the system they created. And within every report, every data point still echoes a simple message: precision is freedom. When technology and dignity unite, prejudice has no ground to survive, and humanity, once again, claims the right to rewrite its own laws.